Mommy. The word came muffled through the rear window glass, small hands flat against it, and for 1/2 second, the entire block went silent. Every phone, every breath, every idling engine. Because Marcus Balogun was 7 years old, and he was watching Officer Ryan Kowalski drag his mother across the frame of the car door by her forearm in the white overhead sun of a Tuesday afternoon, her orange hospital lanyard swinging, her white coat bunched at the shoulder, while Kowalski's free hand was already reaching for his radio in that way that meant he had already decided how this story ended. Dr. Chioma Balogun did not scream. She did not struggle. She turned her head toward the window, found her son's eyes through the glass, and held them, steady, measured, telling him without words that she had already handled this. Because 6 blocks ago she had recognized this patrol car in her mirror and made a phone call to a man who had not been a civilian since 2009. And that man was now 4 minutes away, and Ryan Kowalski was still smiling. Welcome to Frost Folktales. This is where we tell the stories of those who were underestimated, dismissed, and targeted, yet chose courage over silence. If these stories move you, subscribe and be part of a community that refuses to let them fade into the background. 8 minutes earlier, the afternoon light coming through the windshield of Dr. Chioma Balogun's silver sedan was the clean, unfiltered kind, white and direct, the way it only gets in late October when the sun sits low and casts no mercy on anything it touches. She had been on shift for 12 hours at Mercy General Hospital, 12 hours of fluorescent overhead light, compression, decision-making at speeds that most people never experience in a lifetime, let alone a Tuesday. Her white coat still carried the faint antiseptic smell of the ER. Her hospital ID badge was clipped to the orange lanyard around her neck, face out the way she always wore it, the photo and name and title visible. Dr. Chioma Balogun, attending physician, emergency medicine, because after 10 years in medicine, she had never once thought to hide what she was. Her dark blue scrub trousers were pressed neatly under the coat. She looked exactly like what she was. She always did. Marcus Balogun was in the back seat behind her, 7 years old, dinosaur backpack wedged between his feet, iPad in his lap, entirely absorbed in whatever animated universe 7-year-olds inhabit on a Tuesday when the school day is behind them and dinner is still ahead. He had not looked up in 4 blocks. He was safe. He was hers. The thought of him in that back seat was the reason she drove this route home instead of the highway. 3 extra minutes, but she could see the corner store where he got lemon ice in summer, the park where he learned to pump his own legs on the swings, the library with the big glass windows that he pointed to every single time as though he was still surprised it existed. She noticed the patrol car at 3 blocks from the hospital, white and black, moving in the same lane, maintaining the same distance behind her. She noticed it again at 4 blocks, and at 5, not moving closer, not falling behind, just there, precisely there. The way a shadow holds its position. Her eyes moved between the windshield and the rearview mirror with the same clinical rhythm she used when monitoring a patient's vitals, and by block 6, something in her chest went very quiet and very clear, the way a room goes quiet before a procedure. And she understood. She did not tense her shoulders. She did not change her speed. She kept her hands exactly where they were on the wheel. 10 and 2, because her hands had held that position since she was 17 years old, learning to drive in her mother's parking lot. And some things become architecture. She let 4 full seconds pass. Then she spoke, and her voice came out completely level, the way it came out at 3 a.m. in the ER, when the news was bad and the family needed to hear it without it destroying them. "Marcus," she said, "baby, put the iPad down for a minute and look at Mommy." He looked up immediately the way children do when the tone is different. Not alarmed yet, just attentive, his brown eyes finding hers in the rearview mirror. "Good," she said. "Stay looking at me." She held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then she picked up her phone from the center console, kept her eyes on the road, and dialed from memory. The call connected on the second ring. The call lasted 43 seconds. She said, "I am on Del Mar, 2 blocks from the 9th Street light, headed toward Pembroke. There is a patrol car that has been on me for 6 blocks, and it is not passing. I have Marcus." Her voice did not waver. She said, "I need you to know where I am right now." Then she said a single word that was his name, a name the story will give you in the next chapter, when the block sees him for the first time. And she listened for 3 seconds and said, "I know." Then she hung up and sent a text with the address and set the phone back in the center console with the quiet precision of someone placing an instrument down after use. She did not explain any of this to Marcus. She said, "iPad back on, baby. We are almost home." He looked at her in the mirror for 1 more second, reading her the way children read their mothers, sensing the shape of something he did not have language for. And then he looked back at his screen. The lights came on 1 block later. Blue and red, clean and declarative in the afternoon sun. She pulled over without hesitation, both hands visible on the wheel, emergency blinker on. The car stopped fully and correctly before the cruiser had finished pulling in behind her. She did not reach for her lanyard or her badge. She did not move at all. She sat with her hands on the wheel and waited, because she was a black woman in America, and she had been waiting for this moment since she was old enough to understand what it meant to be pulled over alone. And now it was here, and she was not alone. And she was not afraid, and she was going to handle every second of this the right way, because her son was in the back seat, and 7-year-old boys remember everything. Officer Ryan Kowalski came to her window in a short-sleeved dark blue uniform, utility belt loaded, aviator sunglasses that he did not remove, mid-30s, the particular walk of a man who has never once been told that the walk was a problem. He did not ask for her license first. He told her she matched the description of a suspect in a commercial burglary on Harmon Avenue. Dr. Chioma Balogun turned her head and looked at him directly and asked, in the same tone she used when requesting lab results, what that description was. Kowalski did not answer. She asked him to repeat the suspect description. She said it plainly, no inflection, no edge, and the plainness of it was its own kind of force. He told her to step out of the vehicle. She said, "I am a physician at Mercy General Hospital. My identification is on my lanyard, which is visible. I have a 7-year-old child in the back seat. I am happy to provide my license and registration. I am asking for your badge number." The badge number question was the thing. It was always the badge number question. She had watched it happen to others on videos she had never wanted to watch but watched anyway, because she was a black woman in America, and watching was a form of preparation. The badge number question made men like Kowalski feel enumerated, documented, held to a number, and the badge number question made men like Kowalski decide that the situation had changed. He opened her door. The afternoon light hit everything at once. Her white coat, her orange lanyard, her hands that she kept visible, the interior of the car that contained absolutely nothing that matched a burglary description or any other description except a woman who had spent 12 hours saving lives and was driving home with her child. None of it stopped his hand from closing around her forearm. And that is when Marcus Balogun put down the iPad. And that is when the phones came out on the block. 12 of them, maybe more, held up by people who had been walking to their cars and standing on stoops and waiting for the bus. And every single one of them began recording because every single one of them had seen enough to know that what they were looking at needed to be witnessed. Kowalski was telling her she was being detained for her own safety and the safety of the officer, and she asked him again, clearly her voice completely unbroken, to describe the suspect from the commercial burglary on Harmon Avenue. He did not. She asked for his badge number a second time. His grip on her forearm tightened and he began to pull her toward the doorframe, and her white coat bunched at the shoulder, and her orange lanyard swung, and she turned her head. She found Marcus Balogun's face through the rear window glass. His small hands came up and pressed flat against it, both palms open, the way children press against glass when they cannot reach the person on the other side. His mouth formed the word, "Mommy," muffled, small, enormous. She held his eyes. She did not look away. She held his eyes with everything she had, and she made her face tell him what her voice could not reach him to say. "I am here. I see you. I have already handled this. You are going to be all right." Kowalski reached for his radio. The block held its breath. And 4 minutes ago, while she was still 2 blocks from the 9th Street light, while the patrol car was still holding its distance in her mirror, while Marcus Balogun still had his iPad in his lap, a man who had not been a civilian since 2009 read the address she texted him, looked at the clock on the dashboard of a black SUV, and started his engine. There is a particular kind of silence that happens on a city block when people understand that what they are watching is wrong, and that their watching is the only thing standing between what is happening and something worse. That silence had settled over the street now, like a second layer of afternoon heat. Phones were still raised. Nobody had lowered them. Nobody was going to. Officer Ryan Kowalski had Dr. Chioma Balogun's hands behind her back. She was standing at the driver's side door of her own car, her white coat twisted at the left shoulder where he had pulled it, her orange lanyard with the Mercy General Hospital ID hanging crooked against her chest, visible to every single person recording from every single angle on that block. Her son Marcus was still in the back seat. His small hands were still against the glass. She had not looked away from him for more than 4 seconds at a time since this began, and every time she found his face through the window she held it with the same deliberate, unshakable calm. The calm of someone who had decided, somewhere in the 6 blocks between the hospital and here, exactly who she was going to be inside this moment. She had not raised her voice once. To understand why that composure was not passivity, you needed to understand who Dr. Chioma Balogun actually was. And Kowalski had never asked. 9 years before this Tuesday afternoon, Dr. Chioma Balogun walked across a stage at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine at the age of 27, in a room with overhead fluorescent panels casting clean white light across 200 faces, and accepted a degree she had spent every functional hour of her adult life building toward. She was the youngest in her cohort. She was also the one the attending physicians talked about when residents asked what clinical instinct actually looked like in a human being. Not the textbook version, the real version, the kind that reads a patient's breathing pattern from the doorway before the chart is open. She matched at Cook County Hospital for her emergency medicine residency. Cook County, the ER that processed more gunshot trauma than almost any other unit in the country, that ran on controlled chaos and institutional pride, and the particular brand of composure you could not learn from a book. You had to build it out of 1,000 nights when there was too much happening and not enough hands, and someone had to be the steady center of it, or people died. She built it there. She built it through 4 years of overnight shifts, of pediatric codes and overdose clusters, of holding the hands of people who came through the doors of that emergency room, having already survived something that would have destroyed most people, and staying present for them because her presence was, in some measurable clinical sense, part of the treatment. She moved to Mercy General 8 months ago as a full attending physician in emergency medicine, pediatric trauma specialization. She was the youngest attending in the hospital's history. The department chair had told her that during her onboarding, and she had nodded and then immediately asked about the protocols for expedited imaging authorization on pediatric head injuries, because the accolade was less interesting to her than whether the system was set up to save the children when they came in. She drove the same route home every Tuesday and every Thursday, down Mercer Avenue, left on Caldwell, past the corner store with the green awning where the owner always gave Marcus a wave through the window, past the elementary school with the painted mural, across the intersection at 5th and home. She had driven it enough times that she knew when a patrol car was maintaining distance instead of just existing in traffic. She had known by Block 4. She had made the call before she even turned on her hazard lights. Sergeant Bruno Castellano arrived in a patrol unit at 4:22 p.m. 6 minutes into the stop. He was a wide-shouldered man in a blue long-sleeve uniform who had been on the force for 19 years. And he pulled up behind Kowalski's vehicle, stepped out into the full afternoon sun, assessed the scene in approximately 8 seconds. The white coat, the hospital lanyard, the child in the back seat with his palms flat against the glass, the crowd of 12 people with their phones raised, Dr. Chioma Balogun standing with her hands behind her back, Kowalski's hand on her wrist. And he made a choice. He walked to a position 6 feet behind Kowalski, folded his arms, and said nothing. He did not ask what the violation was. He did not ask whether identification had been provided. He did not look at the lanyard. He stood behind the man he was supposed to supervise as though his physical presence were a statement of institutional alignment, which it was, because it was a choice, and every choice is a statement. The crowd saw it. The phones captured it. An 18-year-old kid standing outside the barbershop on the left side of the block said something quietly to the man standing next to him, and the man next to him said something back, and neither of them moved, and neither of them lowered their phone. Castellano's hands stayed folded. 3 desks to the left of Captain Douglas Mercer's office on the 3rd floor of the 14th Precinct building. Detective Leela Subramaniam sat in an orange top and blue jacket with a department-issued laptop open in front of her that she was not using. The laptop she was using was her own, a personal device she brought to work in her bag every morning for the last 14 months. On it, in an encrypted folder she had never opened on a precinct network, was a file she had been adding to since late February of the previous year, when she processed her 4th complaint in 3 months from a black motorist in the southeast corridor of the precinct's jurisdiction. All 4 citing the phrase, matching a description. All 4 citing escalation when ID was provided. All 4 closed without a formal report by Captain Mercer's sign-off. She had started counting after the 4th one. Then she had started documenting. The file currently contained 41 traffic stop incident logs, cross-referenced against formal complaint records and dashcam footage pull requests. 37 of the 41 stops involved black drivers. 22 used the phrase matching a description in the filed paperwork. 0 resulted in arrests. She had internal department emails forwarded to her personal drive through careful and entirely deniable administrative access, in which Mercer used the phrase activity numbers and, in one thread from October, the phrase corridor compliance targets for Q4. She had not decided what to do with the file yet. She had not decided because she was a detective in the 14th precinct, and she understood, with precise clarity, the professional and personal cost of what doing something with it would mean. She had been deciding for 14 months. She had built the file as evidence first, and as a decision-making instrument second. The way you document something when part of you already knows what the documentation is for, but the rest of you is not ready to say it out loud. At 4:19 p.m., she saw a notification on her personal phone. A bystander video, tagged with the cross street she knew. Kowalski's unit number in the caption. She looked at the video for a long time. She looked at the white coat. She looked at the child's hands against the window. She looked at the laptop on her desk, the personal one, and did not close it. Back on the block, Dr. Chioma Balogun stood in the full afternoon sun and did not speak, and did not struggle, and did not give Officer Ryan Kowalski a single thing he could use. She had treated a 12-year-old gunshot victim at 2 a.m. in February and spoken to his mother in the waiting room at 3 a.m. with the same steadiness she was using right now, because both situations required the same thing. Do not let what is happening on the outside of you determine what is happening on the inside of you. She had learned that at Cook County, She had reinforced it every shift since. Her hands were behind her back, and her lanyard was crooked against her white coat, and her son was watching her through glass, and she was the calmest person on the block, including Kowalski, who had said 3 words in the last 90 seconds and whose jaw was working in a way that suggested the situation was not developing the way he expected situations to develop. It was not developing that way because she was not behaving the way he expected people to behave. He had expected fear or anger, because those were the responses that gave him something to work with. Fear ratified his authority, and anger gave him justification for escalation. She had given him neither. She had given him clarity and stillness and a hospital ID that was visible to every single phone on the block. And the absence of anything he could point to and say was a problem had left him with nothing except what he had started with, which was a stop without a real basis, and a wrist he was holding, and 12 bystanders who were going to remember this. The crowd had not dispersed. It had grown. There were 15 people now, then 18. A woman with a stroller had stopped on the far corner. 2 teenagers had come out of the corner store. The owner was at the window. Marcus Balogun's hands were still on the glass. Dr. Chioma Balogun looked at him and held his eyes, and her face was steady and deliberate and full of something that was not reassurance exactly. It was more precise than that. It was the communication of someone telling a person they love, "I know exactly what I am doing. I am not out of control of this. Whatever you are watching, I need you to know that I am in control of something you cannot see yet." And then, from the far end of the block, came a sound, not loud, not fast, just the measured, unhurried roll of tires on asphalt that carries a particular quality when it belongs to a vehicle that is not rushing because it does not need to rush. A black SUV turned the corner into the full overhead light of the afternoon and moved down the block at a pace that was entirely deliberate, the way something moves when it already knows exactly where it is going. Several people in the crowd turned. A few of the phones shifted their angle. Nobody said anything yet, but the air on the block changed. The black SUV turned onto the block at the kind of speed that isn't slow because it's cautious. It's slow because it doesn't need to hurry. There is a particular quality to the movement of people who have spent years operating in environments where rushing signals panic, and panic gets people killed. The vehicle moved like that, unhurried, deliberate, certain of itself, in the way that mountains are certain of themselves. And the crowd, the dozen people with phones raised, the woman by the bodega door, the 2 teenagers on the stoop, the man in the delivery uniform who had stopped mid-step 6 minutes ago and never resumed walking, all of them felt it before they understood it. Something had shifted in the weight of the afternoon. Kowalski had Dr. Chioma Balogun's wrists behind her back. Not cuffed, but held. Sergeant Bruno Castellano stood 6 feet behind him, arms folded across his navy blue short-sleeve uniform shirt, saying nothing, performing the specific silence of a man who has decided that loyalty to the person in front of him is more important than the truth of what he can plainly see. The overhead sun was direct and unforgiving, the kind of Tuesday afternoon light that leaves no shadows to hide in, and every phone on that block was catching every second of it. Dr. Chioma Balogun had not raised her voice once. That was the thing the crowd would talk about later, in the church, in the barbershop, in the comment sections under the videos that would be watched by people who had never been within 1,000 miles of this street. That she had not screamed, that she had not struggled, that she had stood in her white coat with her orange hospital lanyard on the ground near her left foot and held herself with the particular composure of someone who understood, at a cellular level, that the most powerful thing she could do in this moment was to remain completely, documentably herself. Marcus Balogun's palms were still against the glass. The black SUV stopped. The driver's door opened first, and one of the military police officers stepped out. Green top, blue jacket, the kind of build that makes door frames look like they were designed for smaller species of human being. He moved to the front of the vehicle and stood there with his hands at his sides and his eyes on Kowalski, and he did not speak. The second MP came around the passenger side, same jacket, same stillness, and positioned himself with the geometric precision of someone who has rehearsed crowd management in conditions that would make this Tuesday afternoon look like a coffee break. Then the rear door opened. Commander Darius Balogun was 6 feet 2 inches tall, in his dress shoes, and he was wearing his full army dress uniform. Green jacket over a white shirt pressed to the standard of a man who had been pressing his own uniform since he was 19 years old. Gold insignia at the collar, medals aligned across the left breast in the particular order that means something to anyone trained to read it. He was 41 years old. He had the face of a man who had been through things that don't have names in civilian vocabulary and had come out the other side, not hardened but clarified. His expression was completely neutral in the way that a scalpel is neutral, precise, purposeful, without excess. He stepped onto the sidewalk and the crowd reacted before Kowalski did. Someone parted, then someone else. The phones didn't lower, they adjusted angles because every person recording understood instinctively that the frame had changed, that whatever they were capturing had just become something different from what it had been 30 seconds ago. A woman near the corner store audibly whispered his rank. Not his name, just the rank. 2 words, like she was reading something off a wall she hadn't expected to find there. Commander Darius Balogun walked, not toward Kowalski exactly. More accurately, he walked toward the space that Kowalski occupied, in the same way a tide walks toward a shoreline, not aggressive, not uncertain, simply moving according to laws that predate the shoreline's opinion of the matter. He closed the distance to 6 feet, and he stopped, and he looked at Kowalski with the eyes of a man who has stood 6 feet from things considerably more dangerous than a patrol officer on a residential block in the afternoon. And he spoke. His voice was even, measured, the volume of a conversation, not a confrontation. He gave his name, he gave his rank, he gave his unit designation. He stated that Dr. Chioma Balogun was his sister. He stated these things in the sequence a man gives them when he has learned, professionally, that precise identification is the foundation of every interaction that follows, and that it also has the secondary function of making absolutely clear to everyone present, including the 12 phones still recording, exactly who is standing on this pavement and why. Then he asked Kowalski to release her. He used the word asked, not demanded, not ordered, he asked. And that word, that specific, deliberate choice of word, was the most precise thing he could have deployed in that moment, because it meant that he was offering Kowalski a path that looked, at least on the surface, like cooperation, and everyone on that block understood that the ask was wrapped around a structure of consequences so thoroughly built that refusal wasn't really a viable option. It was just a longer route to the same destination. He then spoke for 32 more seconds. He informed Kowalski that before he had pulled out of his parking space, he had already spoken to the precinct's duty commander by phone. He had already contacted the city's inspector general office. He had already notified the JAG attorney currently on call, who had, in turn, already notified 2 additional offices whose names he did not need to specify because the sound of them landing on Kowalski's face was doing the work of specification on its own. And every second of this scene, he said, not this incident, this scene, the word precise and intentional, had been transmitted in real time to 3 separate servers in 3 separate locations because his sister had pressed record on something before she even stopped her car. And the system she'd fed it to was not the kind that Kowalski's captain could make a phone call to fix. Kowalski released Dr. Chioma Balogun's wrists. It happened in the way that a bluff ends when the other player lays down the actual cards, not with drama, not with noise, but with a kind of sudden subtraction, a thing that was present and then wasn't, and the space it left was enormous. Sergeant Bruno Castellano, 6 feet behind, unfolded his arms, and then didn't seem to know what to do with his hands. He put them at his sides. He looked at the middle distance, which is the direction a man looks when he needs a wall that isn't there. Dr. Chioma Balogun brought her hands to the front of her body. She straightened her white coat. It was a small movement. Both hands smoothing the front panels, adjusting the collar, resettling the fabric at her shoulders where Kowalski's grip had bunched it. The kind of thing a person does in a mirror before a meeting. Automatic, specific. And the crowd, all 12 phones, felt the weight of it, felt that this was not just a woman fixing her coat. This was a woman reclaiming the exact shape of herself in public, restoring the form of who she had been before anyone had put hands on her, and doing it without looking at the person who had put those hands on her, because he was not worth the direction of her gaze. She looked down. She saw her lanyard on the pavement beside her left foot, her hospital ID face up in the afternoon sun, the Mercy General logo visible from 6 feet away. She bent and picked it up. She looped it back over her neck. The orange of it settled against her white coat. She did not look at Kowalski. She walked to the rear door of her car, and she opened it and she reached in. And Marcus Balogun came out of that car, the way 7-year-olds come to their mothers after they have been very, very frightened and have been very, very brave about it. All at once, without negotiation, completely, she caught him. She pulled him against her shoulder and wrapped both arms around him, and she put her mouth close to his hair, and she spoke to him quietly. No one on that block could hear what she said. No microphone, no phone, no camera caught those words. They were only for him, and whatever they were enough, because Marcus Balogun's small hands, which had been pressed flat against that glass for the last 6 minutes, were now wrapped around the back of his mother's neck, and they stayed there. Commander Darius Balogun stood in the sunlight and waited. He did not move toward his sister. He did not speak. He stood in his dress uniform with his medals aligned and let the afternoon be what it was, and his presence on that pavement was its own complete statement. And he had already said what needed to be said. Kowalski stepped back. He pulled out his radio. He turned partly away from the crowd and from the 2 military police officers who were still standing at the front of the SUV with the particular stillness of people trained to be the last resort. And he keyed the radio and he called Captain Douglas Mercer. His voice was lower now, different in texture. The voice of a man who has just understood the size of what he is standing in. Mercer picked up in 2 rings. Kowalski told him what had happened. He told him the name. He told him the rank. He described the servers. He described the JAG contact. He described the crowd. He described the phones. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Captain Douglas Mercer asked his first question. He did not ask if Dr. Chioma Balogun was all right. He did not ask about Marcus Balogun. He did not ask what the original justification for the stop had been, or whether the suspect description had ever been real, or what the right thing to do in this moment might possibly look like. His first question was this: how many people were filming? And in the clean, overhead, unforgiving light of a Tuesday afternoon, that question answered every other question that anyone would spend the next several months trying to ask. Captain Douglas Mercer received the call at 3:52 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, and by 3:53 p.m. he was already moving. That was the thing about Douglas Mercer that his subordinates both respected and feared in equal measure. The man did not pause. He did not absorb. He did not stand at his office window in his full blue long-sleeve uniform and stare at the parking lot while he processed bad news. He processed and acted simultaneously, the way a surgeon closes while still assessing, the way a man who has run the 14th precinct for 11 consecutive years learns to treat every crisis as a workflow problem rather than a moral one. 11 years, 4 mayors, 2 police commissioners, 1 federal audit that went nowhere. Douglas Mercer had survived all of it by understanding one fundamental truth about institutional crises. They are only crises if you let the narrative set before you do. Kowalski's call had been brief and clumsy. The man was rattled, his voice carrying that particular register of someone who understood, on some animal level, that he had overreached, but who lacked the self-awareness to fully articulate why. What Mercer extracted from the call in under 60 seconds was this: a stop on Caldwell Avenue, a black woman in a white coat, a crowd of bystanders with phones, a man in an army dress uniform who had arrived in a black SUV and used phrases like Inspector General and JAG Attorney, and the name Balogun repeated twice. Mercer wrote nothing down during the call. He never did. He hung up, stood from his desk chair, straightened his long-sleeve uniform shirt at the collar, and walked directly to the records division. The dashcam footage from Kowalski's unit was pulled internally at 4:01 p.m. Mercer reviewed 11 minutes of it in a side room with the door closed, the overhead fluorescent light casting everything in flat institutional white. He watched it the way a director watches a rough cut, not for the human content, but for the editable moments, the frameable sequences, the gaps where language could be inserted to redirect interpretation. He noted where Kowalski's body camera angle obscured certain hand positions. He noted the audio dropout between minutes 4 and 6. That was a known hardware issue with that unit's model. He noted that Kowalski had, at least technically, verbalized a suspect description before initiating physical contact, even if that description was so generic as to be functionally meaningless. By 4:09 p.m., Mercer was back at his desk, composing the preliminary incident report. His language was precise and deliberately bureaucratic. The stop was characterized as a routine public safety initiative in response to a commercial burglary dispatch. The escalation was framed as Officer Safety Compliance Protocol, a phrase that had the particular quality of sounding like a policy while describing nothing at all. The report noted that the subject, described as an adult female, had been uncooperative during the initial identification phase. It did not describe her hospital lanyard. It did not describe her white coat. It described the incident as having concluded without formal arrest or injury, which was technically accurate and deliberately incomplete in a way that Mercer had refined over many years into something approaching artistry. He filed the report at 4:14 p.m. and immediately called Sandra Holloway, the city's communications director, before the first news alert could surface. Sandra was efficient and politically loyal, and she understood, without Mercer needing to explain at length, that the appropriate posture was watchful silence, combined with a prepared statement emphasizing the department's commitment to professional conduct and ongoing internal review. She had a draft ready within 8 minutes. Mercer read it, changed 2 words, approved it, and moved on. The 3 council members he called between 4:23 p.m. and 4:38 p.m. all picked up because Douglas Mercer's calls were the kind of calls that got answered. Councilmember Bertrand picked up on the second ring. Councilmember Yaw picked up before the second ring. Councilmember Fitzpatrick let it go to voicemail and then called back in 4 minutes, which was the closest thing to hesitation Mercer had observed from him in 6 years. The conversations were brief and coded in the particular language of institutional mutual preservation, references to optics, to the department's track record, to the importance of not letting one incident define a precinct's decade of service statistics. Mercer did not ask for anything specific. He never did. He simply ensured that 3 people with influence understood where he stood before they heard the story from anyone else. He was fast. He was practiced. He had done this before, in 2019 with the Varela stop, in 2021 with the Hollenbeck situation, and twice in the years before that in ways that had never acquired names at all. The system he had built was not a conspiracy in the dramatic sense. There were no clandestine meetings, no envelopes, no explicit agreements. It was something more durable and more dangerous than that. It was a culture of preemptive management, a set of reflexes so deeply embedded in the 14th Precinct's operational DNA that they activated automatically, like an immune response, whenever the institution sensed a threat. At 4:41 p.m., Captain Douglas Mercer stood at his office window in his full blue long-sleeve uniform and allowed himself, for the first time since Kowalski's call, a moment of something that was not quite satisfaction but was adjacent to it. He had contained this before it became a story. He had moved faster than the news cycle, faster than social media, faster than the community's anger could organize itself into something with legal teeth. The woman was a doctor, which was unfortunate optics, but optics could be managed. The Army commander brother was a complication, but complications could be contextualized. The bystander footage was everywhere, but footage without a narrative was just noise. Douglas Mercer did not know about Imani Ofori. He did not know that Commander Darius Balogun, before he had even pulled away from Caldwell Avenue, had made a phone call to a civil rights attorney whose name appeared on the short list of every federal civil rights case filed in this city in the last 9 years. He did not know that attorney Imani Ofori had been retained, formally and in writing, by 4:15 p.m., 1 minute after Mercer filed his preliminary report. He did not know that she had already requested the full incident report, Kowalski's complete disciplinary history, and the personnel files of every officer present at the scene, and that she had done so through channels that bypassed the precinct entirely. He did not know about Mara Pendleton. He did not know that Mara Pendleton, a journalist for the city's largest independent news outlet, who had been watching the 14th Precinct's traffic enforcement patterns for 7 months, had been on Caldwell Avenue within 40 minutes of the incident, tipped by one of the dozen bystanders whose numbers she kept for exactly this reason. He did not know that she had filed a FOIA request for all dashcam footage from Kowalski's unit at 4:29 p.m., 9 minutes before Mercer finished his last council member call. He did not know that the intersection of Caldwell and Morris had a city traffic camera on its northeast pole, a secondary camera operated by the Department of Transportation, not the police department, and therefore not within Mercer's reach, that had captured the entire 11-minute sequence from a different angle entirely, and that Mara Pendleton had already submitted a separate records request for that footage before the sun finished moving across the afternoon sky. He did not know about Detective Leela Subramaniam. She was sitting 3 desks away from him right now, in the open bullpen beyond his office glass, in an orange top under a blue jacket, her head angled toward her monitor, at the particular angle of someone reading something carefully. She had been with the 14th Precinct for 6 years. She was meticulous, quiet in the way that very observant people are often quiet. And she had been building a file for 14 months that she kept on a personal encrypted drive that had never touched a precinct server. The file had 41 entries. It had internal emails. It had the phrase activity numbers in Mercer's own typed words. It had the names of 37 black drivers and the phrase matching a description appearing across 22 separate reports, with a consistency that was not coincidental and was not random. At 4:47 p.m., Detective Leela Subramaniam opened the file, verified the encryption one final time, and emailed it to the office of attorney Imani Ofori. She did not hesitate over the send button. She had been waiting for a moment substantial enough, documented enough, and witnessed enough that the file would land with the weight it deserved rather than be absorbed and dismissed. This was that moment. She pressed send, closed the window, and returned her gaze to her screen with the same quiet expression she had maintained all afternoon, 3 desks away from the man who had never once thought to look. Across the city, in a kitchen with late afternoon natural light falling through the window over the sink, Dr. Chioma Balogun sat at her kitchen table with her white coat folded neatly over the back of the chair and a legal pad open in front of her. Marcus Balogun was asleep on the couch in the next room, dinosaur backpack still looped over one small shoulder, the television running at low volume with the sound of a cartoon she had turned on 20 minutes ago. when his eyes finally stopped fighting it. She had made him dinner first. She had given him a bath. She had read him 2 pages of the book they were working through together and sat beside him until his breathing deepened and his hands relaxed against the cushion. She had done all of that first, in the right sequence, because that was what he needed, and she knew what he needed, because she was his mother, and that was the work that mattered most tonight. Then she had come to the table and opened the legal pad and picked up the pen. She wrote the time she first noticed the patrol car. She wrote the number of blocks. She wrote the exact words Kowalski had used, in the order he had used them, with the pauses she remembered noted in brackets. She wrote the words Sergeant Castellano had not said. She wrote what she had been wearing and what her lanyard had said and where it had been visible. She wrote down everything in precise clinical notation: time, words, sequence, position, witness count, because she had been a physician before any of this happened, and documentation was always the first step. She was not writing to process what had happened to her. She was writing because she had already decided what she was going to do about it. The conference room at 04 Illegal took up the northeast corner of the 4th floor. At 7 in the morning, the fluorescents were already running hot. Imani preferred it that way. Comfortable rooms made people lazy. She was on her 2nd coffee when Leela came in at 6:58. Canvas tote on one shoulder, the face of someone who had been carrying something for over a year and was finally going to put it down. She set a laptop on the table, joined the secure network, typed a long password, and opened a folder named only with a string of numbers. Imani leaned in. Dark green blazer, white shirt, reading glasses already on, a fresh legal pad to her left. She didn't say good morning a second time. She just read. The file wasn't theatrical. Logs, timestamps, email threads, complaint forms, incident numbers, all of it organized the way a person organizes things when they know nobody is going to help them. Leela had taken her time. She hadn't rushed and she hadn't leaked. She just kept writing it down. 41 traffic stops. Southeast corridor of the 14th precinct. 14 months. Imani wrote the number at the top of her pad and underlined it twice. 37 of the 41 drivers were black. The demographics came from the filed reports themselves, cross-referenced against DMV records. Leela hadn't invented a number. Every figure had a source document attached, named and time-stamped. 22 of the 37 reports used the phrase matching a description somewhere in the narrative section. Imani counted them herself, scrolling slowly while her coffee went cold at her elbow. 41 stops. No arrests. No charges. No suspects identified. Not one of those descriptions ever attached to a real person. The stops weren't building toward anything except a number on a spreadsheet, and Captain Douglas Mercer apparently watched that spreadsheet because 3 of the internal emails pulled from a shared precinct server had him using 2 phrases Leela had highlighted in yellow: activity numbers, corridor compliance. Imani read each of those emails 3 times. Then she set her pen down, took off her glasses, pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of her nose, and sat there for maybe 4 seconds. Then she put the glasses back on, picked up her pen, wrote 5 words on the pad, and circled them. She said them out loud, more to the room than to Leela. He built a system. Leela, in an orange top under her blue jacket, hands around a cup she still hadn't opened, nodded once. She didn't look surprised. She looked like a person who had been staring at something alone for too long and had finally watched somebody else see it. There were 3 formal complaints in the file. All 3 had gone through official channels in those 14 months, and all 3 had been reviewed and dismissed out of Mercer's office. The dismissals were a paragraph each and used nearly the same wording. Gerald Foss, 31, pharmacy technician, stopped on a Wednesday evening driving home from work. Patricia Owens, 45, school administrator, stopped on her way to a parent-teacher conference and made to stand on the sidewalk for 20 minutes while the officer ran her plates twice. The third was Mrs. Eugenia Hartwell, a retired teacher of 64. Mrs. Hartwell had been stopped twice in the same month by the same officer, using the same phrase each time. She had filled out the complaint form in careful handwriting, attached a written account of each stop with dates and times, and given the name of a neighbor who had witnessed the second stop and was willing to make a statement. The letter she got back from Mercer's office was 3 sentences. Attorney Imani Ofori wrote Mrs. Eugenia Hartwell's name on her legal pad, underlined it, and drew a small star next to it. Detective Leela Subramaniam had been building this file since the previous October, working from her personal encrypted drive, cross-referencing public records with internal data she accessed in the normal course of her assigned duties. She had not violated a single procedural rule in how she obtained any of it. She had simply paid attention when everyone else in that building had chosen not to, and she had written it down because she had learned from watching cases collapse that documentation without courage meant nothing, and courage without documentation meant even less. At 4:47 the previous afternoon, 6 hours after Dr. Chioma Balogun had been dragged from her vehicle on a Tuesday afternoon in front of her 7-year-old son and a street full of recording phones, Detective Leela Subramaniam had encrypted the full file, composed a single-paragraph cover message, and emailed it to the address listed on attorney Imani Ofori's firm's public contact page. She had done it sitting 3 desks away from Captain Douglas Mercer, who was at that moment on his 3rd phone call, attempting to minimize what had happened before it became something he could no longer minimize. He had been too late before he started. Journalist Mara Pendleton had filed her FOIA request for all dashcam footage from Officer Ryan Kowalski's patrol unit within 90 minutes of the incident. She had done it from the parking lot of the convenience store on the corner of the block, where she had stopped to talk to one of the bystanders who had filmed everything. Mercer's team had moved quickly, pulling the dashcam file internally and flagging it under a procedural hold. But they had made one significant error in their speed. There was a secondary camera. It was mounted on the traffic light pole at the northeast corner of the intersection, operated by the city's traffic management department, which had no affiliation with the 14th precinct and received no calls from Captain Douglas Mercer that afternoon. That camera had recorded 11 minutes and 40 seconds of continuous footage from an angle that captured the entire scene, including Kowalski's hands, Dr. Chioma Balogun's hospital lanyard swinging against her white coat, Marcus Balogun's palms flat against the rear window, and Commander Darius Balogun stepping out of his black SUV in full dress uniform and walking with the unhurried precision of a man who was absolutely certain of every word he was about to say. Mara Pendleton obtained that traffic camera footage through a separate municipal records request filed simultaneously with the dashcam request. She published it at 11:14 the following morning, with a 700-word article that named Officer Ryan Kowalski, named Captain Douglas Mercer, named the precinct, and named Dr. Chioma Balogun as an attending emergency physician at Mercy General Hospital who had been returning home from a 12-hour shift when she was stopped. By 5 p.m. it had been viewed by 4 million people. By 6 p.m. it was leading the national evening broadcast on 3 networks. The phrase "matching a description" appeared in the headline of every major outlet that picked up the story. Somewhere in that coverage, almost incidentally, Marcus Balogun's name appeared with the description, 7-year-old son, present in the vehicle. That detail alone generated a volume of response that crashed 2 media platforms' comment systems within the same hour. Outside City Hall, at 2 in the afternoon, Reverend Samuel Asante stood at a microphone in the rain, in a long dark coat, and spoke into the gathering crowd with the particular cadence of a man who had been doing this work for 30 years and had never once confused urgency for noise. He spoke about Dr. Chioma Balogun, but he also spoke about Gerald Foss and Patricia Owens and Mrs. Eugenia Hartwell. He said names that had not been on any national broadcast. He said them clearly, one at a time, with the full weight of recognition. 200 people had come out in the rain. Among them were 4 black motorists who had been stopped in the 14th Precinct Southeast Corridor and recognized the template immediately when they saw the video because they had lived inside it and had not known until that morning that they were not alone in it. They stood in the rain with their phones off, not filming, just present, which was its own kind of testimony. At 6:43 that evening, while attorney Imani Ofori was still in her conference room with Detective Leela Subramaniam's file on the table and 3 separate annotated legal pads arranged in a row under the fluorescent light, her laptop chimed with a new email. The sender was the United States Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. The subject line read, Preliminary Inquiry, 14th Precinct, Southeast Corridor, Civil Rights Complaint Review. The body of the email was 4 sentences. It was bureaucratic in its language, precise in its scope, and completely without drama. It confirmed receipt of materials submitted by Ofori Legal Group and by a cooperating law enforcement source. It stated that the Civil Rights Division had opened a preliminary inquiry. It listed a case reference number. It named a supervising attorney and provided a contact extension. That was all. Attorney Imani Ofori read it once. Then she read it a second time, more slowly, her finger tracing the case reference number on the screen. Then she read it a third time, and on this third reading she did something she almost never did in this room under this light. She sat back in her chair, looked at the ceiling, and allowed herself a single, long, quiet exhale. It was not a victory. A preliminary inquiry was a door, not a destination. She knew exactly what the distance between those two things looked like, and she had walked that distance before, in cases that did not go the way they deserved to go. She knew the work that was still ahead, but the door was open. And Detective Leela Subramaniam's file was sitting on the table, 41 stops wide, 14 months deep, organized with the kind of care that made it nearly impossible to ignore once the right eyes were looking at it. Attorney Imani Ofori picked up her pen, turned to a fresh page on her legal pad, and wrote the case reference number at the top in clean, even letters. Then she started building what came next. The Hargrove Federal Civic Chamber is on the 4th floor of the Carson building. Skylights in the vaulted ceiling let in enough morning light that the fluorescence above the gallery looked redundant. There's a bronze plaque by the entrance about the public interest and full transparency. Today, maybe for the first time in a long while, the room was going to try to live up to it. Chioma Balogun got there 40 minutes early and waited in the prep room with her attorney. Imani Ofori, charcoal blazer, black turtleneck, leather portfolio already open. They'd been over it for 3 nights running. Imani kept ending those sessions the same way. You know what happened, so don't perform it tomorrow. Just say it. Chioma had nodded each time. She didn't need to be told twice about being exact. She walked into the chamber a little before 10, navy blazer, white shirt, dark trousers, with her hospital ID hanging against her chest on its orange lanyard. Same lanyard she'd had on the Tuesday afternoon Ryan Kowalski decided she matched a description. She'd thought about whether to wear it. Then she wore it. 6 hearing officers at the elevated table, nameplates and water glasses and the thick folders they always have. The one in the middle was Patricia Howe, Federal Civil Rights Commissioner, 23 years on the bench, 61 years old. She hadn't smiled once since 9. Her reading glasses sat on the end of her nose, and she hadn't touched them. The gallery was full. Reverend Asante was in the 3rd row. Mara Pendleton, the reporter, near the aisle with her notebook on her knee. Mrs. Hartwell, retired teacher, stopped twice and let go twice, sat with her hands folded and her chin level, in the careful stillness of someone who had been waiting on a room like this for years. Detective Subramaniam wasn't there. She was up tomorrow and had barely slept. Darius sat in the 2nd row, directly behind his sister, in full army dress, green jacket, medals catching the skylight every time someone moved in front of him. He hadn't shifted once. Hands on his knees. Marcus was next to him. 7, green button-up, dinosaur backpack on the floor because his mom had said yes. He was holding his uncle's hand with both of his and staring at the back of his mother's head, doing the brave thing as hard as he could. Chioma didn't turn around. Imani had told her, "Look forward until it's time. You'll know." The clerk called her name, and she walked up, sat, adjusted the mic, folded her hands. No paper shuffling, no reaching for the water glass. "Dr. Balogun," Howe said, "in your own words, please describe the events of Tuesday afternoon." She started at the hospital, not at the stop. 12-hour shift in the ED. A 4-year-old, a teenager, an older man who'd coded and come back. She walked out to the parking structure still in her white coat. There hadn't been time to take it off. Marcus got in the back with his backpack, asked what was for dinner, put his earbuds in. They pulled out of Mercy General a little after 4. Then she got to the patrol car. Her voice didn't shift. It was the one she used in trauma bays when she had to talk to a family. Not cold, just everything unnecessary taken out of it. She noticed the car at 3 blocks, she said. Noticed it again at 4. By 5 she knew. She had known how to recognize this since she was 14. Nobody in the room moved. She said, "I told my son to put his iPad down. I told him to look at me. I kept my voice the same as it is right now because he was reading my face, and I needed him to read steadiness. Then I picked up my phone and I made a call that lasted 43 seconds. She described the stop. She described the way Officer Ryan Kowalski had approached the window, the words he had used, the absence of any actual suspect description when she asked for one. She described asking for his badge number. She described the moment he reached for her arm. She said, "My hospital lanyard was visible. My white coat was visible. My identification badge with my photograph and my name and the words Mercy General Emergency Medicine was visible. I was not given the opportunity to present it. I was not asked. I was told I matched a description, and when I asked what description, he did not answer." She said, "I want to be precise about what happened next, because precision is what I have. He took my forearm and pulled me across the doorframe. I did not resist. I did not struggle. I turned my head, and I found my son's eyes through the rear window glass, and I held them because I needed him to know that I was in control of something, even if I was not in control of that moment. I needed him not to be afraid of what he was watching." She paused for exactly 2 seconds. She said, "What it means to spend 12 hours saving lives, saving children, saving people other people have written off, doing chest compressions and making decisions in seconds, and never once questioning whether the person in front of me deserves to be saved, and then to calculate on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon whether the way I stop my car and the way I hold my hands and the way I use my voice might be the thing that determines whether I come home. I don't have a clinical term for that. I have lived it. Every black physician I know has lived it. Every black parent I know has lived it. And my son watched it happen from the back seat at 7 years old." The room was completely silent. Not the silence of people being polite. The silence of a room that had stopped breathing. Several of the federal officers seated along the side wall were looking at the floor. Not because they were disinterested, because they could not hold her gaze and maintain composure simultaneously, and their positions required composure. So they chose the floor. Dr. Patricia Howe had not written anything on her notepad in 4 minutes. At 10:51 a.m., the senior hearing officer thanked Dr. Chioma Balogun for her statement and consulted his record sheet. He said, "The record indicates that Marcus Balogun, minor, is present in the gallery as an accompanied witness. Is that correct?" Attorney Imani Ofori said yes. That was correct. The hearing officer said, "Marcus Balogun," and from the second row of the gallery, a 7-year-old boy in a green button-up shirt and dark trousers stood up. He stood the way children stand, when they have been told that what they are doing matters. Straight, careful, slightly uncertain, but holding it together. His hands were at his sides. His dinosaur backpack was still on the floor. He was looking at his mother's back. Dr. Chioma Balogun turned around. She looked at her son's face for the first time since she had sat down at that table. And something happened in her expression that was not tears and was not a smile, but was every version of both of them at once, compressed into the particular look that only exists between a mother and a child who have been through something together. The room responded. There was no announcement, no instruction, no formal prompt. But 3 people in the gallery pressed their hands over their mouths. One federal officer standing by the chamber door turned his head toward the wall and kept it there. Reverend Samuel Asante closed his eyes. Mrs. Eugenia Hartwell unfolded her hands and pressed one flat against her chest, over her blue jacket, and left it there. Commander Darius Balogun put his hand on Marcus Balogun's shoulder, and the boy sat back down and leaned into his uncle without a word. At the elevated table, Dr. Patricia Howe looked at Marcus Balogun for a long moment. Then she reached up to her face, removed her reading glasses, and set them on the table in front of her. She did not put them back on. She did not reach for them again. She sat with her hands flat on the table and looked at the center of the room with the expression of a woman who has adjudicated 100 cases and has just understood, with complete clarity, that this one required something more than adjudication. It required reckoning. Dr. Chioma Balogun faced forward again. She adjusted the microphone. She was not finished. She had 3 more pages of precise clinical time-stamped documentation to deliver to this panel, and she was going to deliver every word of it. She had not come this far to stop before the record was complete. The conference room on the 4th floor of the Municipal Services Building had no windows facing the street. What it had was overhead fluorescent lighting that ran the full length of the ceiling in 2 unbroken rows, the kind of light that flattens shadow and leaves no corner to hide in. There was a rectangular table, 8 chairs, and a small placard at the head of the room that read Disciplinary Review Panel, Case File 2241. The coffee on the side credenza had gone cold an hour before anyone arrived. Officer Ryan Kowalski sat in a navy blue suit, no tie, his hands folded on the table in front of him. His union attorney, a compact man named Gerald Fitch, in a gray blazer over a white shirt and dark trousers, sat to his left with a leather portfolio open to a page he had been annotating since 7 that morning. The 3-member panel sat across from them, a deputy commissioner, a civilian board representative, and a labor compliance officer. The fluorescent light made everyone look equally tired and equally accountable. Gerald Fitch spoke for 40 minutes. He cited procedural guidelines. He referenced training protocols. He used phrases like reasonable officer standard and ambiguous situation management and context of community volatility. He spoke with the practiced rhythm of a man who had done this before, who had sat in rooms exactly like this one and argued the language of policy against the weight of human consequence. He was precise. He was professional. He did not mention Marcus Balogun once. Ryan Kowalski said nothing. That silence was its own kind of answer. The deputy commissioner read from the summary file. 41 documented stops, 37 black drivers, the phrase matching a description appearing in 22 filed reports with no corresponding suspect bulletin attached to any of them. 3 prior complaints, all dismissed at the precinct level. 1 dashcam recording and 1 traffic light camera recording, both showing Dr. Chioma Balogun's hospital identification in plain view from the moment she exited the vehicle. Her lanyard and white coat, not incidental details, but primary identifying information that any officer conducting a lawful investigation would have been required to acknowledge and process. Gerald Fitch said his client had exercised judgment within the parameters of his training. The deputy commissioner folded the file closed. Ryan Kowalski's badge was surrendered across the table 11 minutes later. His service weapon unloaded in a sealed evidence envelope. He pushed both items across the wood surface with 2 fingers, like a man sliding chips to the center of a table he had already decided to walk away from. He did not look at the panel. He stood. He buttoned his jacket. He walked out of the room and down the hallway, and the fluorescent light followed him all the way to the elevator. Gerald Fitch gathered his portfolio. The deputy commissioner sat for a moment longer than necessary, reading nothing, the closed file on the table in front of him. 3 weeks after Kowalski's termination, on a Wednesday morning when the sky was wide open and natural light came through the high windows of the federal courthouse lobby, a grand jury returned an indictment. Captain Douglas Mercer, 11-year commander of the 14th Precinct, was charged on 2 federal counts. The first, civil rights conspiracy under 18 U.S.C. 241, for coordinating a systematic pattern of racially discriminatory traffic enforcement against black residents in the precinct's southeast corridor. The second, obstruction of justice, for the internal suppression of dashcam footage and the filing of a preliminary report he personally reviewed and approved that characterized the stop of Dr. Chioma Balogun as routine officer safety compliance within 3 hours of an incident that every piece of recorded evidence directly contradicted. The email chain was the architecture of it. 14 months of internal correspondence between Mercer and 2 shift supervisors, including Sergeant Bruno Castellano, referencing activity numbers, corridor compliance targets, and in one message dated 9 months prior, an instruction to keep the southeast numbers up without paperwork trails that create review exposure. The language was bureaucratic. It was also, as attorney Imani Ofori had argued before the grand jury, a blueprint. Detective Leela Subramaniam testified for 2 hours and 40 minutes. She wore a green blazer over a white top and sat very straight in the witness chair. She had been a detective in the 14th Precinct for 6 years. She had watched Mercer's system operate for 14 months before she began documenting it, and she had documented it for 14 months before she encrypted the file and sent it to Imani Ofori's office at 4:47 p.m. on the day Dr. Chioma Balogun was pulled from her car 4 blocks from Mercy General. She answered every question in full. She did not hedge. She did not qualify her memory. She had kept records because she understood, with the particular clarity of someone who worked inside an institution and watched it harm people, that records were the only thing that survived long enough to matter. When she finished testifying, she walked out of the courthouse into the overhead sunlight and did not speak to the cluster of reporters on the steps. She got into her car and sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel, and then she drove. The indictment was announced publicly at 2 p.m. Mercer was taken into federal custody at his home in the blue long-sleeve uniform he had put on that morning, as if the day were ordinary. His attorney said he would fight the charges. The U.S. Attorney's Office said the evidence was substantial. Journalist Mara Pendleton published the full email chain by 4 p.m. The City Council chambers had skylights set into the ceiling in 3 panels that ran from the front of the room to the back, flooding the space in natural daylight that mixed with the overhead fluorescent panels along the walls. Every seat in the public gallery was filled. There were people standing along the back wall. Outside, on the steps of City Hall, Reverend Samuel Asante stood with a crowd that had begun gathering 2 hours before the session opened, not because they thought presence guaranteed outcome, but because being there was its own form of testimony. Mrs. Eugenia Hartwell sat in the 6th row of the gallery in her blue jacket, buttoned to the collar, her hands in her lap. She was 64 years old and had taught 3rd grade for 31 years before she retired. She had been stopped twice by Ryan Kowalski in the same month, each time on the same stretch of the southeast corridor she had driven for 12 years. Both times she was told she matched a description, Both times she provided her identification. Both times she was released without documentation, without explanation, without apology. She had filed a formal complaint after the second stop. It had been reviewed and dismissed by Captain Douglas Mercer's office in 8 business days. She had not stopped driving that route. She had simply started keeping a journal. The Independent Oversight and Accountability Act had been in drafting for 6 weeks. Attorney Imani Ofori had worked on the legislative language in the evenings after her case files were closed, sitting at a desk in her office under the fluorescent light with the city's existing oversight code open on one screen and her own annotated draft on the other. She had written the subpoena power provision herself. She had argued, in 3 separate meetings with council members who expressed concern about departmental friction, that a civilian review board, without the authority to compel testimony and records, was a performance of accountability rather than accountability itself, and that the city had already paid, in legal exposure and public trust, the full cost of performing rather than practicing. The council members had listened, some of them because they understood, some of them because the federal indictment of a precinct captain had restructured the political math in ways that made institutional courage temporarily affordable. The act established 3 mechanisms: a civilian oversight board with 9 members, the majority of whom were required to be community residents from the precincts under review, with subpoena power over departmental records and personnel; a mandatory dashcam disclosure protocol requiring all footage from any stop resulting in a physical interaction to be preserved and made available to any subject of that stop within 72 hours of a request; and an external complaint investigator, an independent position funded through the city's Civil Accountability Office and specifically prohibited from being appointed, reviewed, or removed by any member of the police department or its command structure. The vote was 11-4. Mrs. Eugenia Hartwell watched the tally board at the front of the chamber as each vote registered. She did not cheer when the count passed the majority threshold. She did not stand. She sat with her hands in her lap and watched the numbers settle. And then she looked down at her hands for a long moment, and then she looked back up at the board. 31 years of teaching had given her a particular relationship with patience, the understanding that things worth building took longer than you wanted them to, and arrived quieter than you expected. The number on the board was 11. She read it twice. Around her the gallery responded with noise and movement, people embracing, people pressing toward the aisles. Reverend Samuel Asante's voice came through from somewhere outside the building, and even through the walls and the glass and the institutional stone of City Hall you could hear that he was speaking to a crowd that was listening. Mrs. Eugenia Hartwell stood, buttoned the last button on her blue jacket that had come undone, and walked out of the chamber at her own pace. Attorney Imani Ofori called Dr. Chioma Balogun that evening. Dr. Chioma Balogun answered on the second ring. She was at the kitchen table, her white coat folded on the back of the chair, the overhead light on. Marcus Balogun already asleep down the hall. Imani Ofori went through the results in sequence, each one precisely stated. No inflation, no shortcut. Kowalski terminated. Mercer indicted on 2 federal counts. The act passed. 11-4, with all 3 provisions intact, all 3 mechanisms funded and operational, the external investigator position fully insulated from departmental control. Dr. Chioma Balogun listened to all of it without interrupting. When Imani finished, there was a brief silence on the line. Then Dr. Chioma Balogun asked one question. She asked Imani to go through each structural change again, specifically, what was dismantled, what replaced it, and what the enforcement mechanism was for each provision. Imani Ofori went through it again. Precise, in order. Dr. Chioma Balogun wrote it all down on the legal pad in front of her, the same one she had written on the first night, the same clinical notations, the same careful sequence. When she finished, she set the pen down and looked at the page. She said, Good. Then she said thank you. And she meant the full weight of it. And Imani Ofori understood that she did. Dr. Chioma Balogun set the phone down on the table. She looked at what she had written. The overhead light was steady above her. Outside, the city was still doing what cities do. Moving, negotiating, forgetting some things and refusing to forget others. Inside, the legal pad was open and the ink was dry, and the words were there in the order she had put them, which was the only order that had ever mattered to her. She turned to a new page. It is a Tuesday afternoon, and the sun is sitting high and clean over the city, throwing flat white light across every surface. Windshields, storefronts, the pale concrete of the boulevard. The kind of Tuesday afternoon light that does not hide anything, that makes every shadow sharp and every color exact. Dr. Chioma Balogun is driving home from Mercy General. Same white coat, same orange lanyard clipped to the lapel. Her hospital ID facing out, her photograph visible. Same car, same route, same Tuesday rhythm she has kept for 3 years on this street. In the back seat, Marcus Balogun has his dinosaur backpack on the seat beside him and his iPad balanced on his knees, and he is watching something with cartoon voices, and he is 7 years old, and the afternoon is ordinary, and that ordinariness is the most precise kind of triumph there is. She checks her mirror at the first block. The habit is automatic now. Seated somewhere in the body below conscious thought, the same place that knows how to hold a scalpel and how to speak calmly to a parent whose child is critical. The mirror shows her the street behind her, ordinary and open. A delivery truck, a cyclist. She checks again at the second block, clear. At the third block she checks and there is nothing behind her except the city going about its Tuesday, and something in her chest. Something she has been carrying with the precise, careful grip she uses for everything, releases, not dramatically, not with tears or a shudder, just a quiet, almost biological exhale, the kind that belongs to the body rather than the moment, the small mechanical easing of a thing that has been held tightly for 92 days and is now, gently, being set down. She drives 2 more blocks without checking the mirror once. At the corner of Delacroix and 9th, she signals and pulls to the curb in front of a narrow store with a green awning and a hand-painted ice cream cone on the door that has been slightly crooked since 2021 and that Marcus Balogun finds deeply funny every single time. They have been stopping here for 2 years. They stop here because Marcus Balogun believes, with the complete conviction of a 7-year-old, that this particular store makes better chocolate ice cream than any other place in the known world. And Dr. Chioma Balogun has never argued the point because she suspects he may be right. The owner is a man named Gerald Osei, who wears a green apron over an orange shirt and who has run this store for 19 years. He looks up when the door opens and the small overhead bell rings. And when he sees Marcus Balogun, he reaches into the case without being asked, because he knows the order, because that is what 2 years of Tuesdays builds. He makes the cone carefully, 2 scoops, the second one angled so it does not fall, and he holds it out across the counter. Marcus Balogun says thank you with the solemn sincerity of someone receiving something important. Gerald Osei waves off the payment when Dr. Chioma Balogun reaches for her wallet. His hand is a brief, certain motion. He looks at her for just a second, longer than the transaction requires. Neither of them says anything about the phone he held up on a Tuesday afternoon 92 days ago, capturing everything from 14 feet away while the whole block stood still. Neither of them says anything about the footage, or the news cycle, or what followed. Some things do not need to be spoken to be completely understood. The cone was the sentence. She nods once. He nods once. Marcus Balogun is already at the door. They drive home in the late afternoon light. Marcus Balogun working on his ice cream with the focused attention he gives to important tasks. and Dr. Chioma Balogun drives without checking the mirror again. The kitchen table at home is clean except for a glass of water and a short stack of mail she has not opened. She sets her white coat on the back of the chair, the same chair where it lived that first night when the house was quiet and Marcus Balogun was asleep on the couch, and she sat down with a legal pad and wrote everything she remembered in the precise, sequential notation of a physician documenting a case. She makes 2 cups of tea she will forget to drink and sits down. She goes through the mail in order. The third envelope has the seal of the city's newly formed Independent Civilian Oversight Board in the upper left corner. She opens it with the same deliberate steadiness she has used for everything. The letter is 3 paragraphs. It informs her that the board, established 41 days ago under the Independent Oversight and Accountability Act, is currently constituting its first civilian panel. It notes that the board specifically sought representatives with professional expertise in community health and emergency care. It notes that her name was put forward by multiple community members, by the Office of Attorney Imani Ofori, and by a joint letter signed by the residents of 4 city blocks in the 14th Precinct Southeast Corridor. It invites her to serve as community medical representative with the full scope of the board's authority, subpoena power, mandatory access to dashcam records, direct reporting to the city council independent of any police department review. She reads it once, straight through. Her expression, the quiet and concentrated look she has when she is reading a chart and building a complete picture. Then she reads it again, slower, and this time something in her face changes. Not much, not dramatically, but the way a room changes when someone opens a window and air comes through that was not there before. She sets the letter down on the table. Her phone rings. The contact reads Darius. She answers it, and his voice is warm in the direct, economical way of someone who spent 15 years learning to say exactly what matters. He asks how she is. She tells him she is good. She tells him she is going to accept. He is quiet for a moment, and she knows he is nodding on the other end. She tells him Marcus Balogun drew a picture of him in his dress uniform for a school assignment about people the students admire, and that the teacher sent a note home saying Marcus Balogun gave a 3-minute explanation of military insignia to the class from memory. There is a pause on the line, longer than Commander Darius Balogun usually allows silences to run. When he speaks again, his voice is the same as before, controlled and warm, but she hears everything in it anyway, because she has known him her entire life and because some things live in the pauses. They talk for 4 more minutes, nothing urgent, nothing formal, and when she hangs up the kitchen is quiet, and the late afternoon natural light is coming through the window above the sink. The wide, unhurried gold of a sun beginning its long descent, filling the room with the same honest clarity as the overhead light at Mercy General, where she spends her Tuesdays keeping people alive. She pulls the legal pad from the stack beside the mail. She has carried this pad with her since that first night, because she was a doctor before she was anything the state tried to make her that afternoon, and documentation was always the first step. And the habit did not stop when the crisis did. She opens it to a fresh page. She picks up her pen. She writes the date at the top in her clean, precise clinical hand. Then, below it, she writes 2 words as a heading, and she underlines them once. Recommendations. She begins to write. The room is warm with late light. Marcus Balogun is in the next room drawing with crayons. The white coat hangs on the back of the chair behind her. Outside, it is a Tuesday afternoon, and the street is ordinary, and she is building something. You just heard a story that history tried to overlook. If it stayed with you, take a second to stand with it. Subscribe, share, and help us keep telling the stories that deserve light, not silence.